Welcome to the ASI Pill. Special drop, Dave Blundin, MIT lecturer and AI venture investor, in conversation with Alex Wissner-Gross. SpaceX files for the largest IPO ever. AI disproves an 80-year-old Erdős conjecture. The financial singularity arrives early. Let's go. Dave Blundin opens. Strap in for the most out-of-band sentence in modern capitalism.
Spree.
That sentence is so out of band with any point in human history. So anyone out there doing a startup, there is capacity for 1,000 unicorn transactions. Remember, unicorns would be insane.
The financial singularity.
So this was a problem posed by the famous Hungarian mathematician Paul Erdős about 80 years ago. Now AI has just solved it. Not only was it faster, not only was it able to brute force, but it was also smarter.
This is like a much bigger momentary than just solving a math problem.
Hashtag solve everything, Peter. We're seeing it.
Back at Stanford, had a whole bunch of really fun meetings with AI founders here.
Dave, let's go to you first on this one.
The TAM is just under the size of the entire U.S. GDP, and I'm sure they landed it. We don't want to claim to be bigger than the entire U.S., so we'll be just one notch below. But Eric Brynjolfsson hosted Maura and I for dinner last night at his house. Eric is a professor of economics and AI at Stanford HAI. That's the AI lab of Stanford. And he was the first guy to mention this to me, and I was like, come on, $28.5 trillion TAM. So he was going off on, but there's no way to disprove it. There's no reason it shouldn't be true. Elon's core thesis is that we can 10x the global economy in 10 years. Most people think it's possible, but it's longer than 10 years. But regardless, if the global economy 10x's, then his TAM should easily fit within 25 or 28.5 trillion.
You almost have to ask, did SpaceX acquire XAI or did XAI acquire or reverse acquire SpaceX? Because certainly based on the TAM analysis, it looks a little bit more like the latter rather than the former, with enterprise applications dominating the addressable market. I think the most interesting part in the entire prospectus was actually the bit about what Anthropic is now paying SpaceX, $15 billion per year for data center access.
Yeah.
And by the way, in the past 48 hours, it's not just Colossus 1 that Anthropic is paying for, it's Colossus 2 as well. So in the past couple of pods, I made remarks to the effect that GROK is on life support, and a bunch of folks I saw in the comments said, oh no, he's against Elon. How outrageous is this claim? No, actually, I think far from being outrageous, I think SpaceX's prospectus arguably supports that entire thesis, that SpaceX is basically taking now not just Colossus 1, which maybe charitably one could have argued is sort of a relic, slightly older GPUs and a heterogeneous set of GPUs at that, and giving it to Anthropic. But Anthropic now also using compute from Colossus 2? No, this, to my eye, looks like SpaceX basically abandoning the foundation model space, handing it over to Anthropic, focusing on the infra layer, building out the Dyson Swarm, record time to mention Dyson Swarm, record time to mention Dyson Swarm into the episode. And focusing on becoming the infra layer. And they can, I think SpaceX, I'm just reading the tea leaves here with the prospectus, SpaceX AI seems relatively uninterested at this point in owning their own foundation model. They've also, as part of this, announced that they are going through with the purchase of Cursor 30 days after their planned IPO. And Cursor is based on Kimi at this point. So SpaceX's foundation model lineage is seemingly switching over to a derivative of Chinese open weight models with a lot of fine tuning based on probably American reasoning traces. But SpaceX in this weird climate wants to seemingly own the layer below and above. It wants to own the infra layer. That's the Dyson Swarm and all the data centers. And it wants to own the layer above. That's macro hard. Which other hyperscaler does that start to look like? Microsoft, with its strategy of enveloping OpenAI. Exactly.
Are they still playing?
meet the old boss, same as the new boss.
Yeah.
SpaceX is trying to transform itself, I think, into a Dyson Swarm version of Microsoft.
Wealth in the universe.
But the interesting thing to me is that they're barely even selling it. Like, yes, it is in the prospectus that they intend to provide earth-to-earth transport to humans, cargo transport type things. Obviously, they're still a space heavy lift company. But if you just look at the prospectus, they look like Microsoft in space. That's the story that they're selling to retail right now.
Because that's what the investors understand.
That's
Well, just some confirmation for what Alex was saying too. The Stanford PhD I was just meeting with before this podcast is tracking all of the talent and confirmed that the great people have left XAI by the droves actually, but they're all going to Anthropic.
Yeah,
and Karpathy. I mean, he's got to be the ultimate coup. We had that on the last pod. Shane Longprey from MIT, who's phenomenal. He's joining Anthropic now too. So a duopoly between Anthropic and SpaceX AI is pretty daunting for everybody else. You think about the best researchers all want to join Dario because they trust him and because the models are phenomenal. And then you put all that compute onto Elon's space empire. And that's a heck of a duopoly. I don't know though if Elon plays duopoly forever. It doesn't seem like his
playbook. Yeah,
but
he doesn't play well with others. It's fascinating. So
the other thing, the terafab. Where's the terafab in the prospectus? It's the same story. We don't need to promote things that are still hypothetical. This is 1.7 trillion is enough for now, maybe.
Yeah, there were a bunch of assets that were shared. Macrohard itself was, if I remember correctly, characterized as in part shared with Tesla, in part being informed by Tesla AI. And I also think Optimus, there's a curious split that I don't know how it's going to play out between the Optimus AI and the Macrohard /XAI /Cursor AI, where right now SpaceX in this bizarre sort of incestuous ecosystem of Elon-affiliated companies, SpaceX is seeming to get, in some sense, the digital Optimus, if you will, the Macrohard worker for knowledge work labor, and Tesla is seeming to get the embodied Optimus. And not obvious to me exactly how, from a governance perspective, all of this IP is supposed to flow back and forth between them.
A lot of predictions, Alex.
Important in that, the super voting control. Remember, we mentioned on a podcast a while ago that Elon has never had what Sergey and Mark Zuckerberg have, which is a public entity that can raise many billions of dollars in an overnight, where he's the controlling shareholder. So this will be the first time that he's in that position. Remember, he doesn't control Tesla. That's why he's constantly going to Delaware court over his comp package and
but he will.
Yeah, this will be a new thing in the Elon verse. And remember, Peter, you were an early investor in XAI. Remember that capital raise when it was getting off the ground?
Yeah, the very first one. Yeah.
Remember the amount that he was raising, which seemed like a lot at the time?
Oh God, I don't.
I recall. I don't remember either, but I recall it being like an $8 billion valuation and maybe $1 billion raise or something like that, which is just hilarious now because now you're looking at $100 billion size.
The other thing,
$75 billion here raise.
He's about to have a currency to go on a shopping spree.
Yeah.
And so my bet is once they go public, they're going to be beginning to acquire a number of companies as part of it.
And one thing we posted the other day, once these guys are public, they can easily do 1,000 acquisitions or more of $1 billion or more. The world, like that sentence is so out of band with any point in human history. So anyone out there doing a startup, maybe you'll screw it up, but assuming you don't screw it up, there is capacity for 1,000 unicorn transactions. Remember, unicorn is called unicorn because it's supposed to be extremely rare. All right. It's just a whole new world.
The old days.
And by the way, the prediction market, I have it for you. Polymarket predicts by the end of this year a 20% probability of SpaceX and Tesla merging. I'll be watching, not from the moon. I would really love to see orbital refueling happen sooner rather than later. I don't know when that's expected later this year, but I think being able to get to the point where we can not just do propulsive landing, but also orbital docking and refueling between starships is going to be such a key moment. It's also the hammer that the Bezoses of the world have been using to argue that the Starship architecture, which is a little bit, if I were to play out an analogy, a little bit more internet packet oriented, it's the lunar architecture of Starship colonization of the moon is very launch intensive. It involves dozens of independent launches and refueling steps. Whereas historically, if you look at like the Apollo architecture, it was a much more monolithic architecture. You go up, and then you go over, and then you land, and then you come back.
You carry all the fuel from the ground for that one mission all the way.
Exactly. So I think the world, myself included, will be watching with quite a bit of optimism that, call it the Starship packet type architecture, for you send everything up to LEO in packets, and then you do a bunch of refueling steps, and then you send the packets over to the moon, or you send them to Mars, is a superior solution. I would view it almost as analogous to the switch, no pun intended, that the internet made, or I should say that networks made, from circuit switched systems, where you had, in some sense, a single contiguous bit of atoms connecting a transmitter and a receiver on a network, to packet-based switching, where there was a complete decoupling of bits from atoms. Same idea here with a Starship-based solar system transport architecture. We're aggressively decoupling cargo from transport. And so fingers crossed that Starship V3 and orbital refueling later this year enable us to packet switch the solar system.
Well, if data centers, you heard Sundar at Google I/O saying data centers in space, we're not going to talk about it today, but it's very clearly on the roadmap. But if Elon and Anthropic are working in cahoots to build the Dyson Swarm or Dyson Sphere, then Google has to react to that with something. And here's Eric Schmidt, our former CEO with a rocket company. So they have to play fast followers somehow. I mean, you're right. It's starting from pretty far behind, but something has to give, because Google can't buy SpaceX.
I also wouldn't necessarily over-index on the Starship architecture being the definitive final word on how we get to orbit. There are going to be many, many future technologies, I would predict, over the next 5 to 10 years that will leapfrog, in terms of the applied physics, Starship's launch capabilities. And it won't necessarily be SpaceX that's the leader in the field for leapfrog capabilities. So I think there are many.
That's true, but there are two things happening concurrent with that. First of all, the fast follower effect. Once you can see what worked and what didn't work, it really helps you a lot in the copying. And that varies by technology. But then concurrent with that, you have like Mikado coming up with mechanical design AI. Mm-hmm. You remember when we were interviewing Elon, he said, this is the greatest thing ever built by humanity without AI assistance. So it'll be the last great thing. But it was entirely built with people and protractors and crayon. I'm kidding. But it was CAD CAM.
How retro.
It was CAD CAM, hand built, designed CAD CAM without AI mechanical design assistance. That'll never happen again. So that might really accelerate Eric Schmidt.
So
I
by the time people watch,
think that the design space of aerospace lift and heavy lift is vast, and we've only scratched the surface of it, I think. And to Dave's point, once it's demonstrated how large the market for heavy lift is in the form of building out that Dyson Swarm, I expect many, many competitors to come out of the woodwork, many of which are probably already known names. And some of them, or maybe all of them in aggregate, I do think will give SpaceX a run for its money.
All right, we could
be copying everything it can out of SpaceX. And I'm sure there will be Chinese heavy launch capabilities and multiple Chinese Dyson Swarms as well.
They've tried. No successes yet.
And now Alex pulls the ripcord on the whole framing. Forget Starship architectures for a second. What if we are about to get something Asimov saw coming? AI as planetary psychohistory.
Remember Isaac Asimov's Psychohistory from the Foundation novels?
Yes.
Right. So the premise of the Foundation novels is that a mathematician named Harry Seldon, this is grand galactic scale sci-fi, Harry Seldon, great mathematician, invents a theory that he calls psychohistory that's able to predict at grand scale human civilization. So, and he's able to predict the collapse of the Galactic Empire and a whole bunch of other interesting things. So Future Sim is a benchmark. Just a minor correction. I think Future Sim itself as a benchmark is not from OpenAI. It's from a group of independent researchers, but it does benchmark a bunch of models, including models from OpenAI. And it's such a clever architecture. It's benchmarking the ability for a variety of models to predict events beyond their knowledge cutoff date and without access to the web. So they can't look up, say, more recent information. And the fact that the state of the art right now is already at 25% accuracy, this is the worst psychohistory models, if I may borrow from Asimov, will ever be. And I agree with the contention that if you extrapolate this out, we'll get Monte Carlo tree search of policy decisions. We'll be able to predict to some extent, predictable events in the future, at least as a function of perhaps human actions. And Peter, you and I spoke about this a little bit in Solve Everything in some of our forecasts for what would happen the latter half of the decade from 2026 to 2035 about planetary scale solutions. I do think with the ability to predict planetary scale outcomes come the ability to predict planetary scale interventions, not unlike how I would argue disease is probably going to get solved. This will be the planetary analog of what a virtual cell can do for curing all disease, in the sense that if you have a perfect digital twin of the system that you're trying to fix, you can exhaustively test all possible interventions to get you from the bad state to a good state.
That a bit later.
There's another implication of this that we're kind of glossing over, which is, right now, if you look at what New York does, there are many, many, many hedge funds that specialize in different areas, so semiconductors and retail and whatever. And those are all supported by prime brokerages. So there's much bigger banks that do all the trading and accounting, and those are prime brokerages. That entire industry could turn into just one or two AI models. And so the concentration of wealth effect from this would be insane. But if the AI is just fundamentally better at picking markets, it's not going to sit there and just do one market. It's going to expand quickly across all markets. And so you're going to, if this plays out the way it's starting to, you're going to see a collapse into just a couple of mega funds that have massive AI budgets.
The financial singularity.
Indexing versus individual stock picking?
Oh, God, no. That's not an index. The index finds blind. This is so much better than an index. Actually, it's an active index. I'll call it a half agreement. Well, this is part of an overall trend where the foundation model companies are starting to roll out legal, now they're rolling out finance, they're rolling out APIs that enable vertical, disintermediation of all these vertical companies, lawyers, financial accountants, whatever. I think it's creating an ecosystem of new startups that are early adopters of these APIs that can then, disrupt the markets. And I think those companies are going to do incredibly well, while the foundation model companies do incredibly well. But what a lot of people are overlooking, if you're in New York and you look at this massive financial institution with 20,000 financial advisors, you can't envision it getting disrupted. There's just so much mass and concrete and meetings and files and so much regulatory barrier. But over here, this parallel economy is growing, which is the AI economy working within itself. And everyone in New York is like, yeah, but all the money's over here in the banks. It's not over there in that new economy. Well, after these next IPOs, that money will be in the new economy. It goes through the public markets, through SpaceX and through Anthropic and through OpenAI, back into the agent-to-agent economy, which is an entirely parallel banking and finance system, independent of the original one.
Everything else.
Yeah, well, if Elon's right, it'll be 10 times bigger than everything you see in New York in about 10 to 20 years and growing on a much faster curve. And it doesn't care about any of your legacy baggage. It's going to grow on its own. And so I think a lot of people are coming around to this view that, we can leave the concrete world alone. We don't need to scare everyone and disrupt it, because we're building a parallel AI world here anyway, and it's going to be bigger anyway. And so I think it's an interesting story within the story. Salim, I'd love to get your take on this.
Yeah, so this is essentially the over again.
I think the thing that filled in, just filled in this month and is so newsworthy, is the conduit of the money from the old to the new is now really clear. Like Orn, where Alex is an advisor, is a really good example. Orn is a security where you can deploy your money into AI and you can get it right on Robinhood or buy it on the exchange. And that conduit then moves the money from the old economy into the new economy. And once it's in the new economy, it doesn't care about the legacy banking system. And the same with these IPOs that are coming up. Trillions of dollars that are moving.
It's like the Bitcoin ETF.
Well, as I closed my newsletter today, the day of recording, cogito ergo IPO. I think therefore IPO is the thinking of the moment. When I look at the announcement of OpenAI launching personal finance, I ask myself, where's the monetization? OpenAI having, as I've mentioned numerous times on the pod, having largely pivoted away from consumer to enterprise and needing to justify very high value productivity per token, I ask myself, where's the value per token in this? Is OpenAI really seeking to become a financial institution? Doubt it. The value, I suspect, is a bit of Kremlinology, is advertising. OpenAI is following the Google playbook. Why did Google go into developing all of these financial verticals? Because some of the financial queries, and Dave probably knows better than any of us, the financial queries can be enormously lucrative from an advertising perspective. So if OpenAI hopes to monetize personal finance conversations, I think they're probably just going to do it by running OpenAI ads for consumers relating to personal finance. And the more that they can tailor particular information to the particular circumstances of a retail investor with all of these integrations, that will enable them to target far better ads in conversation to those users.
And today, Dario announced no ads on Anthropic. Just flat out, we're not doing advertising.
Which is very convenient post hoc, given that they're focused on enterprise.
Yeah, they don't have the consumer anyway.
And same thing for personal finance.
But critically, Anthropic's suites of skills are targeted at businesses, whereas OpenAI is targeting this at consumers. OpenAI wants to charge enterprises. So I'm sticking with my ad theory.
Yeah, that's right. Google too. It's OpenAI versus...
Okay, now the math one. Paul Erdős posed a problem 80 years ago that humans could never crack. AI just did, and it did it weird.
Alex, your explanation, please.
So first, just a few seconds about what the problem is. So this is a problem posed by the famous Hungarian mathematician Paul Erdős about 80 years ago. And the problem was basically asking the question, if you have a plane, a two-dimensional plane, and you can put n points in the plane, what is the maximum number of pairs of points that can be separated by so-called unit distance, basically by a fixed distance? It's a very simple to pose problem, very hard to answer. So Erdős's original conjecture, which has held essentially until now, was that it was effectively impossible to do much better than in terms of the number of pairs that could be separated by this fixed unit distance. It was, he conjectured, impossible to do materially better than some number that's proportional to the number of points themselves. So basically some number of pairs that's linear in the number of points. And now, for the first time, OpenAI has revealed that an internal model that hasn't been publicly released has disproven that conjecture and found weakly superlinear scaling. Why should anyone care? This is just, as I like to say, math is cooked. This is going to be the new Exhibit A that I cite for how cooked math is. This is one of the most important problems, as the video mentioned, in combinatoric geometry that stood for the past 80 years. And now AI has just solved it. And notably, if you unpack all of the accompanying documentation and commentary, there's quite a bit of interesting commentary. This wasn't, say, something like the four-color problem that one might imagine, given that it involves combinatorics. A four-color problem being, if you have a two-dimensional map, what's the minimum number of colors that you can tile each or color each country in to make sure that no two adjacent countries are the same color. There are problems in math in combinatorics, like the four-coloring problem, that tend to be exhaustively solved by AI, and then mathematicians and others point to those exhaustive brute force solutions and say, gosh, like maybe AI is more exhaustive, it's better at brute force, but it lacks human brilliance. It lacks leaps of creative insight. This is not a problem like that. This is a problem that has the top mathematicians in the world who specialize in this particular area looking at its reasoning traces and concluding that not only was it faster in some sense, not only was it able to brute force lots of different theoretical approaches, but it was also smarter. And it was smarter, though, in an interesting way. One of the commentaries, and definitely I would encourage everyone to go to the OpenAI website and read a number of professional mathematician commentaries on the reasoning chain of thought that it used to solve, really to disprove this conjecture. There were some interesting comments to the effect that from looking at the reasoning chain, they could see that it was pursuing all sorts of, call them exotic possibilities that humans would be too exhausted to pursue. So it was arriving at creativity by sort of both being faster, but also being able to brute force all sorts of outlandish possibilities. And in the end, one of those possibilities And I think the language from the chain of thought that ultimately led to the solution began with something like, optimistically, if I pursued this, something might happen. And that turned out to be the solution. So if we remember like the infamous Move 37 from AlphaGo's match with Lee Sedol, and how being able to brute force, but with clever learned policy search, the reasoning tree of a Go game, we're starting to see that play out in math. And by the way, that's going to play out everywhere else as well. It's going to play out in physics. It's going to play out in every science, engineering, hashtag solve everything.
Well, I think, in the past, we've had very hard humanities last exam questions on the pod and made the point that you would have to think hard for 3 or 4 hours to even understand the question. And then, of course, then Alex says, I think the answer is 4, and it turns out to be right. but putting that aside, this one, if you rewind the video and listen to the first couple sentences of what Alex said, that's the whole problem. You can, if you like crossword puzzles or you like Sudoku, you're going to love this one. Listen to it again. I'd really encourage the team to splice in the images, because for the last 80 years, humanity thought the best solution was this really simple grid. It's just points in a square. And if you look at the final, AI solution, which is not proven to be the best solution, it's just better than the square, it's beautiful and it's elegant and it's not intuitive at all. And it gives you a lot of new insight into, wow, AI is going to be really good at things like magnetic bottles and protein folding and chip lay. It looks a lot like a chip design problem. We're laying out the wires in an optimal way. The final answer doesn't look intuitive to you at all as a human, but it's better. And so this is like a much bigger moment in history than just solving a math problem. It's so noteworthy. I thought you described it so beautifully and eloquently. Hopefully history will.
I think you did a great job too. I think that the solutions, the optimal solutions to things, aren't necessarily as human legible as the human solutions. And I agree with the sentiment, Dave. I think this is heralding an era when AI solves very hard, in some sense, optimization problems, and the solutions look positively exotic, inhuman, maybe even biological.
And it's never any slower than...
Now, the China video gen hot take. What does it mean when the Chinese frontier labs are pulling ahead on consumer video, of all things?
Somewhat differently in China. And if you have access to more video from whatever source, however legal or illegal it is, you can train better models. I think when we were first discussing CDance 2.0 on the pod, I made a similar comment. Utterly remarkable to me, some of the videos that seem to be popping out of CDance 2, not because it's seemingly an algorithmic innovation, but because for whatever reason, legal or otherwise, these Chinese frontier labs have access to more data. And there are videos floating around the internet. I think most astonishingly, there's a video floating around of a guy inserting himself into key moments in the Harry Potter cinematic universe. I linked to it from my newsletter. Key moments, stabbing or otherwise violently intervening with unpopular characters. I think probably we're going to see quite a bit of this. It makes the boundary between fan fiction, which historically was limited to text or maybe images, and video, just completely dissolves that divide. And I think the copyright lawyers will probably have a field day if anything like this is tried in the West. But for now, it's the Chinese models that seem to have all of the both Western and Chinese video training data to do it.
Alex, is this the place that you see China leading American models the most at this time?
It's sort of a stereotype / cliche at this point that China was always going to have more data because they could pull more data from civilians and maybe also pull more pirated video data. And also maybe they're in a somewhat better position from an energy generation, still a weaker position algorithmically, and still in a weaker position from a chip perspective. So do they pull ahead in video generation? Right now, it seems they're pulling ahead in consumer video generation, even relative to, say, Gemini Omni, which we discussed in the last pod for now. But maybe there will be some enormous algorithmic innovation that enables the West to...
Yeah, well, I think that, if you study how video generation actually works, it's using the same transformer algorithm that's caused all these other breakthroughs. So under the covers, it's the same 2017 massive breakthrough driving video generation as well. But what the Chinese have done here is, you take video content and you compress it into a latent space, and then you decompress it into video and image creation. And within that latent space is where all the innovation happens. But other domains like chemistry, like biology, like, all of physics, they also have latent spaces. And so if you see the Chinese get ahead in video generation and sustain the lead, that's a good leading indicator for every startup trying to say, I don't need to compete with Anthropic and OpenAI because I'm better at chemical reactions. I'm better at robotics. I'm better at whatever. And if you can maintain a lead at better AI within any of those latent spaces, that's a really good sign for all the startups, because they can then actually maintain that lead within, like Salim within EXO. I can actually have the best company management latent space knowledge. And so it's a really interesting, cool leading indicator. I'm kind of cheering for them to keep their lead, which is pretty daunting versus Google, because Google has all the YouTube content. China has all the TikTok and all the short form content. But it doesn't seem like China has a massive data advantage. They just
level of video generation.
A few months ago, like world models, including Genie 3, already do that. That's what you're asking for. Interactive video generation and real-time world models already do that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, we remember, I don't know if you remember, Peter, but we saw Liquid AI a year ago generate images as quickly as you could speak, like instantaneously coming out of Liquid AI. If you try to do that now, today, you wait like a minute or more, and the experience is nowhere near as much fun as the real-time, like creating as fast as you can think. But we're so short on compute, and that's one of the reasons Liquid AI is doing well, is because it's so much more efficient. But that holodeck experience we're trying to create is, it's entirely possible to build the holodeck today, but nobody has the compute available to deliver it.
And Dave with the strong take. What does it mean when college graduates boo Eric Schmidt for stating the obvious?
Yeah. Dave?
Well, this is clearly priority one for X Prize now. I mean, you've got $100 billion of charitable money suddenly unleashed at OpenAI. They don't want this at all. So, I mean, historically, no one expected this to happen this quickly. So they put very little effort. This is their wake-up call. Look at these videos. Like, Eric Schmidt is a hero of, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, business executive of all time. But when the job market is basically zero for college graduates coming out, what do you expect? And in the sentences there weren't exactly inflammatory, right? AI is the next industrial revolution. That's not exactly a controversial. Like, imagine if they'd said something controversial, what it'd be like a revolution in real time. But that's the reality outside of the couple places in America where AI is happening. Yeah. The rest of the country is that. And it's really important that people be aware of that. And then, take that $100 billion of charitable money and get to work on this.
Yeah.
I'll just add, I used virtually all of my education for what I do, just saying. If Eric Schmidt and Gloria Caulfield were getting booed at Harvard, MIT, or Stanford or similar for mentioning AI, then I'd be concerned. If I remember correctly, these weren't Harvard, MIT, Stanford, or similar.
No, but there's a majority of the graduating class of 2026. Right?
What that says to me is that virtually everyone in that class is anchoring their expectations for stagnation, and that's not a great place to anchor expectations at all. But also, I mean, Salim, to your point about and Peter, your point about how they should be booing the university or booing the college. There's selection bias. You don't get to graduation if that's your attitude in general. You probably skip college altogether. So I think there's a bit of selection bias here, that we focus just on those who've narrowed their possibility space while not maybe leveraging AI to its fullest, and then choose their graduation ceremony as a time to channel their angst regarding the disappearance of the lower rungs of a professional ladder that AI is automating away. It's probably too little too late, and they should be, I would argue, starting businesses. Where inevitably I'll get flamed for saying not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, but not everyone wants to be a college graduate either. Shows to me that there's a bit of an overhang for the skills that are being taught are being automated away by AI. So it's not unnatural for these students to at least be considering using AI for all of their homework, coding, essays. Doubly so at schools like Stanford and like Princeton that have historically had honor codes. I've never quite understood the logic of a so-called honor code. It seems to me a recipe for laziness on the part of faculty or otherwise proctors. They should just be supervising the exams. If you want to make sure that calculators or AIs aren't being used, or earn the vast tuitions that are being paid to the university and supervise. I think if anything, this points the direction, if higher ed is going to remain at all recognizable at all, and I'm not sure that it will or even deserves to, I think the direction of far more supervision, far more proctoring, maybe even some sort of wilderness camp at a university level where students are denied technologies and asked in the style of Werner Vinge and Rainbow's End and Fast Times at Fairmont High.
I love that book.
Students have to interact with actually the real world and interact with the real world in a way that's impossible to cheat without succeeding, like building their own actual businesses instead of writing business plans, actually solving hard problems in computer science instead of solving formulaic tests that require humans be in the room to supervise. That's, AI. I think, the direction this goes in.
To a class called Foundations of AI Ventures, where you have to build a business plan. So it's already on exactly the mission that Alex was outlining. So, if your business plan gets funded, you get an A. So it's not in this, it doesn't have this particular problem. But it seems obvious to me that you want to be teaching the students to use AI. And if you just look at their prompt stream, you can grade them. You don't have to have tests at all anyway. So it's what Alex said, that the schools are struggling to hold on to something that, it goes back to when graduation speakers would show up on horseback and you'd expect the crowd to hear wisdom they couldn't hear any other way from some great human being. Why do we need graduation speakers today if we have podcasts? Well, we don't. Well, then why do we do it? Well, it's traditional. It goes back 150 years. Okay, well, the exams do too. Of course, it makes no sense. But, it's really hard to let go of tradition after tradition after tradition. But what do you think the singularity is going to be like? This is. I mean,
is this actually cheating, or is this what students should be doing? I mean, do you expect these students not to be using AI when they get to the real world? Why are you training them for something that isn't going to exist in the future?
It's even worse. You're putting them in an impossible situation. Forget the test, but even in the homework, no, we don't think you should use AI. What does that mean? You just put the kid in an impossible ethical situation. All you're doing is torture now. Megasoft, you should trademark West.
Megasoft, okay.
Mega Hard is a great name, though.
I'll give a hot take on this one, Peter. It seems like such a strange decision, given that the frontier labs, of which Meta right now I don't consider a frontier lab. I think we have at this point 2.5 American frontier labs, none of which is Meta at the moment. The frontier labs are all purchasing enormous amounts of synthetic data for computer use assistance training across a wide variety of environments. It seems a little bit strange to me, maybe I'm missing something, for Meta to view its own internal computer use as a valuable pre-training or more likely post-training source. It strains a little bit of credibility, for me at least, to think that there's enough diversity of computer use just within Meta for this to be worth all of the hostility it's inevitably incurring from employees on top of all of the workforce cuts. It makes me almost wonder if this is a way of basically encouraging a subset of employees to just quit out of Meta anyway. If I were looking for better post-training data at this point for computer use, I'd be leaning heavily into synthetic data, and I wouldn't be antagonizing thousands of employees with mouse tracking. That's my hot take on this.
That's fascinating.
I completely agree. I was going to say a much more violent version of what Alex said. The use of this data is nonsensical as a tool internally. This is entirely about knowing what your employees are doing and using it to evaluate and sort performance. But I think people better get used to it because it's going to happen pretty much everywhere. Also, I think if you look at all the data that Google has gathered for decades now, I think a point that Eric Schmidt made years ago very quietly was that if Google ever wanted to make more money, they see every quarterly earnings report.
I had that exact conversation with him. He said we could make a ton of money just once before we're lawsuits start flying. They see
exactly. So the higher level point,
they see all the searches for all the purchases ahead of earnings reports.
Well, and once Gmail took over, everyone sends their board reports out to board member. I'm on so many boards. They arrive by Gmail, naked, just as attachments. And in Google's terms of service, they write in them, we human beings won't look at all your emails, but our algorithms will. And humans could too, but they don't say they won't, but they imply they won't. But the algorithms look at them. So yeah, but I think the high level point there is that the data gathering is happening for sure. And you're crazy to misuse the data because of the backlash. And this to me is what Alex said, like why you just created a negative news report that you didn't need. Why do that? We know you're gathering the data, but don't abuse that gathering in a way that creates some massive uproar like this, because that's what's been going on in China for decades. But it's also Google has all the data, Apple has all the data. They don't really look at it. So the data gathering is happening, and Peter, you've made that point over and over again. Yeah. So getting in an uproar and fighting it is crazy, though. You're just labeling yourself as a difficult to hire person. It's not going to stop because of your having a rant about it. So I'm not saying just adopt it either, but I'm saying don't just rant and then go home and feel like you did something. You didn't achieve anything.
It would certainly. So there are so many perverse incentives when one introduces novel types of taxes or floats taxes like this. The first obvious novel incentive is get rid of tokens entirely. There are many token-free or tokenization-free approaches to autoregressive and non-autoregressive machine learning at this point. We could swap to diffusion models entirely if we wanted. There are ways to do diffusion models with no tokens, or we could skip the tokenizer step entirely and stick with transformers. All this, naively, all this would do is just push for the abolition of tokens altogether. I think then the response is, okay, fine, let's tax the flop. Let's tax floating point operations or something there. More perverse incentives. I think it's very difficult to come up with an input resource that would be best taxed short of actual dollars or some function of dollars that would actually enable a pure play targeting of the AI labs without creating severe perversity. That I think we saw it so I'm not sure if we have a slide for this, but he's testing that right now in the form just in the past 24 hours of offering $2 million of OpenAI tokens in return for a safe to all YC companies, 2,000 companies. That I view that as a preview of some universal basic compute type offering to everyone. Not quite obvious what the equity equivalent is, but something like that.
Yeah. Dave?
It's amazing how quickly we've decided that LLM AI and the word token are a fixed thing that can be taxed like bananas or shipping containers. But anyone who actually works in the industry knows that you can actually tokenize with byte pair encoding, which is what you usually do. But you can use 1 byte encoding, you can use 4 byte encoding, you can use no encoding at all. Suddenly what you tax disappears from the world a minute later. So yeah, it's just funny that people feel like, I've got an idea. Let's tax per token. It reminds me of a conversation in Riyadh where one of the royal family that we were meeting with was saying, what do you think a good cost per token is? Because we're big investors in a couple of companies and their cost per token is $1 a million. I'm like, with what context window and what? That's a nonsensical question. And they're like, well, we'll just answer it. So I gave an answer and they're like, great, because we're less than that. We cost less. Okay. That's going to be really tricky and amorphous and fast moving.
Yeah, but I think you've already laid out the portrait for maybe Neal Stephenson's next cyberpunk novel. It's got to be about compute tax havens on Peter Thiel funded data centers, seasteads on the ocean to avoid all the token taxes.
Now the strange detour from extinct birds to ex-utero human gestation. What happens when Jurassic Park techniques get turned on us?
I'll just note, I can't wait for the dodo, which I think is one of the targets for this. They've tried this now with a couple dozen birds. I think it's a far cry from what we saw in Jurassic Park, where the emphasis in that Mr. DNA reel was more on the molecular biology of resurrecting extinct species and not the organism level or egg level focus. I think it's important. And as I understand it, there have been some major challenges that prevent the naive Jurassic Park type approach from working in the case of eggs for these extinct birds. Apparently, it's the case that late in gestation, they require large amounts of oxygen that are difficult to supply through artificial eggs. And so at least historically have been difficult to supply. So creating effectively an oxygen permeable artificial egg that's supportive of late gestation metabolism seems like an important step. And the giddy sci-fi fan in me wants to know, how well will some of these techniques generalize to humans? Can we perhaps appropriately generalize these to ex-utero gestation of humans?
Well, at least two of the 15, the dodo, and what was the deer, the red or blue deer?
The blue buck, I think, or something like that.
The blue buck.
Yeah, so those two were extinct because they were delicious and easy to hunt. So Salim is opening dodo fillet restaurants, getting ready, and maybe a burger, a blue buck burger.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but my visioneering proposal a few years ago was that genotype to phenotype mapping problem, where you start with a picture of the final outcome, and then you try and create the DNA that matches the picture.
Exactly. That's what they do.
Yeah.
They're building
you could
products.
You could blind test and see if, one theory is you created a completely different animal. It just looks like the original. The other is no, the only way you can create the original is by getting the DNA within what could have been, the reproducing line of that original species. No other DNA is going to get you to that exact look, feel, behavior, shape, whatever. And you could backtest that and get the answer to that.
It'd be ironic if we could resurrect stochastic parrots with stochastic parrots.
No one's going to get that, Alex.
You don't think so?
I mean, this X Prize should pick this up immediately and say, okay, the information is nonsensical. And this is proof positive that people will freak out about anything that they don't understand that's a change that's coming to their neighborhood. And so the solution is some combination of PR and education and making it a smooth thing. And it's just such a solvable problem if you put some budget and energy and thinking behind it. But, these act like the idea that you would rather live next to a nuclear power plant instead of a data center, which you would never even know it was there. It's not taking your water. I promise you, it's not taking your water. And the electrical effect, they already said, you've got to find your own power. You can't disrupt the local power. Like there's nothing in those objections. But if you've been to a town hall meeting, there's a group of people, they will object to anything that's brought up any given day. That's what they do.
And the geopolitical compute one. What happens when California taxes its billionaires and Nevada offers them refuge?
Well, this isn't what's actually going on here is different from what the story implies. What's going on here is California in November is going to vote on whether to take away 5% of the money of 200 billionaires in California. Just not their income, but we're just whatever money you've made in your life, we're going to take 5% of it as a one-time tax. People are leaving to go to Incline Village, Nevada, by the ton. Nevada doesn't have much of an economy, but they have a beautiful shore of Lake Tahoe where all the Californians are snatching up houses at an incredible clip to try and get out of the state. So Nevada is now saying, we like data centers because we like the inflow of money and success this is going to bring to our otherwise desert state. I mean, this makes Vegas look like a rounding error compared to what we could achieve with this. So you've got this cultural divide between the California protect everything view and Nevada saying, whoa, what an opportunity view. So, no one's going to drain Lake Tahoe. That's not really what's going on. This is state versus state, completely different perspective on which way to go with compute and AI and data centers.
Alex, what's your take here?
I've commented in the past, over the past 2 to 3 episodes about how the tokens want to flow to the highest dollar per token productivity ratio. I think we'll see in the early lead up to the Dyson Swarm, the kilowatts flowing to the highest dollar per kilowatt value applications as well. And for those in the audience, there will inevitably be someone who takes issue with the story and says, no, you're misconstruing. This has been in the works since the late 2000s, since 2009. It's not actually an AI data center story. It is actually an AI data center story. It's a bit inside baseball, but based on public reporting, the transition away of some of the funding from NV Energy to the local electric utility for Lake Tahoe has been planned since 2009 to be switched off or switched away from Lake Tahoe, but has been perpetually extended. And this time around, it looks like it's not going to be extended because there are data centers that could be far more productive consumers of that electricity supply than the residents of Lake Tahoe. So I view this ultimately as a kilowatts until we build the Dyson Swarm, or radically expand our energy supply. And we're probably, I think, going to do both at the same time. The kilowatts want to flow naturally to their highest productivity outcomes. It's quite the indictment of the California state government, doubly so given that Texas has all of these amazing oil and gas resources on top of it all.
Good point.
Yeah, it's a permitting story.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that makes America strong is that we have 50 states that actually can compete. And the more we allow them to compete, the better off we are in the long run. California right now has incredible tailwinds. Like, I can't even tell you. But, historically, the legislature will say, oh, more tailwinds, great, more taxes, and just keep absorbing a bigger and bigger fraction of the growth. But I don't see anything slowing down California's AI success. Is just off the charts. But Texas is doing a great job of taking control of the data center side of it, and they're going to benefit tremendously from.
Right now, Texas is the closest thing the United States has to a special economic zone. Maybe this new agreement in the Philippines that the White House has made, maybe that will become the American Shenzhen. But short of that, Texas is our special economic zone. So I'd say we should make the maximum amount that we can from this federalist system and use it.
Nice.
Energy is becoming the balance sheet of AI, right? It's very clear.
It's a key input. It's not the only input, but it is an input.
Now the firm size one. Coase says you need huge companies for huge infrastructure. Alex thinks AI flips that. Who is right?
On this one. So Salim, I'd love to push on this a bit, and from the perspective of falsifiability. So you mentioned Coase earlier. I've written a fair amount at this point in the context of some of my own investments regarding Coase, arguably the Intercontinental Railroad, for example, following Coasean economics, pushed the firm size to be larger. Now you needed huge continent-spanning companies to encompass intercontinental railroads. I've argued that AI pushes the firm size smaller because maybe you can, as I've argued in past, you could have one-person conglomerates. Can you make a falsifiable prediction, given all of this, about the size of the firm? Let me try maybe an adjacent question, if I may. So you're laying out, as I understand it, a theory of the future of the firm or future of organizations. It sounds like it has both descriptive and normative, in other words, what should happen versus what will happen, or vice versa, components to it. How should an organization that is intrigued by this, how should it judge whether this is at least an accurate description of the future of the firm? How do we quantify this to know whether this is actually, like, what are your benchmarks? How do we know whether this is even accurate? It's just by meat body, Peter.
Yes. See you guys soon.
All right, folks.
Yeah, see you soon.
That was the ASI pill, Alex Wissner-Gross and Dave Blundin from Moonshots EP257. The Dyson Swarm has a Microsoft now. Math is cooked. Chips are flowing to where the dollars are. Subscribe for more. Until next episode.